I'm Alice England Burns, and I'm going to read a story from a series I'm calling Stories from 8th Avenue. This is number 2, Jewel and Them. The Beverly Hillbillies didn't have much on the Englands. A family of 8, 2 parents and 6 children, ranging in age from 3 to 23. The Englands had moved from a backwoods farm in Blount County, Alabama, to the big city of Birmingham in 1941. 3 of the England children had married and had children of their own, or else there would have been 9 children. The relocating portion of the family rented a house on one of the busiest thoroughfares in the city, 8th Avenue, which ran right past Legion Field Stadium, home of the Iron Bowl and many high school and college football games, as well as rodeos, track meets, and other entertainments. The England's version of oil, that is, black gold, swimming pools, millionaires, was actually World War II, occasioning the existence of jobs in the steel industry in Birmingham. 3 of the kids were too young to work. 2 got jobs in the steel mills, and 1, Jewel, then 18 years of age, got a job as a waitress at Walgreens, explaining candidly, and I quote, "I can make a whole lot of money in tips by switching my tail as I walk away from the soldiers' tables." If you had to label people I or E, that's introvert or extrovert, all of the England sisters would be I's to a greater or lesser degree, except Jewel. Caution was not Jewel's watchword. If she thought something, she said it, polite company notwithstanding. If an idea popped into her head, she acted on it. Consequently, she was, in her own mind, a writer, an artist, a world traveler, and for purposes of this account, a tap dancer. Having struggled to become a registered nurse by her middle years, she was able to fund adventures for herself as well as oftentimes her sisters. She took 1 oil painting lesson and decided 1 was enough, but she painted prodigiously, turning out still lifes, landscapes, and even a few abstracts. She liked to paint in her bedroom with all of her sisters gathered around. The most artistic of the England sisters, Sybil, said that Jewel had a natural understanding of color and how to blend color. Her flower paintings were especially lovely. Before she gave up painting, she self-appraised her paintings as being worth a fortune. She held this opinion firmly, with no solicitation of opinion, let alone agreement, from any art critic. When she turned to writing, her stories were about grown-up subjects, but they were written in a childlike format and vocabulary. You have to understand that it is a fact that Jewel could count on the fingers of one hand the number of books she had read outside of textbooks. When her attorney asked her to read his memoir and give him her opinion, she had her most bookish sister read it and write a little review to give the man. In spite of evidence that writing was not her forte, she submitted her stories to many, many publishers, and she spoke condemningly of people who vanity published. In the world traveling arena, she had indeed traveled a bit around the United States, once spending a year in California working as a waitress, and she and her husband had gone to Europe for a reunion of his World War II Army buddies. Many were the stories she might have written about that, but she didn't. She did, however, regale her sisters with the wonderful impressions she had. She had the first mobile phone known to mankind, I think. It was huge, and had a generator pack kind of thing that you had to carry around with it. As soon as she got it, she started driving to places she deemed unusual, phoning each of her out of state sisters, telling us she was in her car and asking us to guess where she was calling from. Now, for purposes of amazing us, she could have been 3 blocks from home. But no, she would drive to the top of Red Mountain or out to the Florida short route, places that she believed we would find astounding that she was calling from her car. She was the first of us to get a microwave. On the way home with the microwave in the box, she bought a turkey, mind you, and tried to cook it in the microwave as soon as she got it plugged in. I think that a microwave that could do a good job on a turkey would have been a real boon, as Jewel had set her kitchen on fire more times than anyone that I ever knew of. All of these adventures aside, I want to talk about Jewel's tap dancing adventure, which came before the others. Shortly after the auspicious arrival of the Englands in Birmingham, Jewel had signed up for tap dancing classes. The only tap shoes she could find were way too large, so she stuffed the toes with tissue paper, and away she went to classes, looking not unlike Bozo the Clown in those huge shoes. The only place she had to practice at home was the living room hearth. This was the one place in the house that did not have carpet or an uneven wooden floor. So as we sisters sat expectantly in the chairs around the living room, here came Jewel in a short dress and tap shoes, and away she went, tapping furiously on the narrow hearth before her enthusiastic and approving audience. One of the sisters would stand by with a container of water intended to put her out if she caught the tail of her dress on fire. Mama suggested we bank the fire. To whom did she bequeath that common sense, I wonder? I was privileged to share many, many adventures with Jewel before she died at the age of 86. She and I used airplane tickets her son was given for giving up his seat on an overbooked flight, choosing to go to Victoria, British Columbia, where a friend of mine was administrator of a hospital. We spent an entire week there having high tea at a famous hotel and riding on the top deck of a red tour bus to see all of the sights. We enjoyed shopping for gifts for family and friends. There was a neighborhood bakery which seated people if they wished. I will never forget how delighted Jewel was with not only the many goodies offered there, but also the quaint atmosphere of the little shop. Jewel was completely fascinated by the fact that my friend's hospital was a Christian Science hospital with no medications whatsoever permitted. She learned a number of things that she, as a nurse, felt would add to her own ways of bringing comfort to her patients. In our later years, after we were both widowed, having bought a cabin in the North Georgia mountains, I persuaded Jewel to visit for as often and as long as possible, considering that she continued to work as a nurse until she was 75 years old. At that time, she only retired to travel to her son's home in Virginia to take care of her daughter-in-law and her first, and it turns out only, grandchild. While with me in the mountains, Jewel convinced an excited gaggle of realtors that she was in the market for a cabin of her own, setting them off on a wild goose chase that had them knocking on my door long after Jewel had left. When I think about Jewel, now that I am approaching my own mid-80s, I never fail to see her in my mind dancing on the hearth with the carefree abandon she gave all of her endeavors. There are even times when I see her as I imagined that she saw herself. I am completely sure that, given her ever optimistic embrace of each of these endeavors, her 18-year-old self saw herself eventually dancing on a stage in front of hundreds. Possibly the audience would consist of soldiers somewhere far from home, given the year her dancing career started. That's the end.